They say the most dangerous person in the room is the one who listens while everyone else is talking. Sterling Cross, the shark of Wall Street, thought the woman refilling his scotch in the first-class cabin was invisible, just another uniform in the background of his billion-dollar empire. He thought he could humiliate her with a complex mathematical equation just to entertain his board members. He was wrong. He didn't know that the waitress he was mocking was the ghost of a company he destroyed 10 years ago. And by the time the plane landed, she wouldn't just solve his math problem, she would solve the equation of his destruction. The air inside the Pan-Atlantic first-class lounge at JFK International Airport smelled of expensive leather, stale espresso, and quiet desperation. It was a smell Sterling Cross loved. It was the scent of money waiting to move. Sterling, the CEO of Ethelgard Capital, sat in a secluded corner, his thumbs dancing violently over the screen of his phone. At 52, Sterling looked like a man who had been carved out of granite and then polished with old money. He wore a bespoke suit that cost more than most people's cars, and his eyes were a cold, piercing grey, the kind that assessed human beings not by their character, but by their liquidation value. "I don't care what the regulatory filing says, Arthur," Sterling snapped, not bothering to lower his voice. The few other passengers in the lounge glanced over, then quickly looked away. You didn't stare at a predator while it was feeding. "The acquisition of Helios Logistics happens today, before we land in London. If the numbers on the fuel hedging don't line up, fix them. I'm not paying $300 million for a company with leaking margins." Across from him sat Arthur Pendergast, his CFO. Arthur was a soft man, perpetually sweating, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that had seen better days. "Sterling, the audit committee is going to ask about the debt-to-equity swap," Arthur whispered, glancing nervously at the lounge attendants. "If we push the merger through while we're in the air, we bypass the SEC's 4 p.m. deadline, sure. But it's risky. If anyone looks closely at the Helios valuation—" "Nobody looks closely, Arthur. That's why I hired you, to make sure the glass is frosted enough that nobody sees the cracks." Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Let's go. I hate waiting." They moved toward the gate for Flight 88 to Heathrow. As they boarded, Sterling didn't look at the flight attendants greeting him at the door. To him, they were furniture, necessary, functional, and entirely replaceable. He threw his coat onto the seat of one nay without looking to see if anyone was there to catch it. Someone was. "Allow me, Mr. Cross," a calm voice said. Sterling didn't turn. He just sat down, pulling a stack of files from his briefcase. "Scotch, blue label. Neat. And tell the pilot to make up time. I have a dinner at the Shard at 8. The woman hung up his coat with practiced precision. Her name tag read Aara. She was in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that held a strange, tired intelligence. She wasn't the bubbly, 20-something flight attendant usually assigned to the VIPs. She moved with an economy of motion that was almost robotic. "I'm afraid we're waiting on a slot from ATC, Mr. Cross," Aara said, her voice neutral. "We might be delayed 10 minutes on the tarmac." Sterling stopped shuffling his papers. He slowly turned his head to look at her for the first time. He looked at her uniform, her name tag, and then her face. He offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't ask for a weather report, Aara. I asked for a scotch. Do you need me to draw a diagram for that transaction? Or is the complexity of pouring liquid into a glass within your skill set?" Arthur chuckled nervously from seat 1B. "Good one, Sterling." Aara didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She merely nodded. "Of course, sir. Right away." She walked back to the galley, her posture rigid. Inside the galley, another attendant, a younger man named Greg, whispered to her. "Jesus, that's Sterling Cross, the guy who gutted North Star Tech last year. He's a monster, Aara. Don't let him get to you." Aara reached for the bottle of Blue Label. Her hand trembled for a fraction of a second, then went still. "He doesn't bother me, Greg. Men like him never look down. They never see what's right in front of their feet." "What do you mean?" Aara poured the amber liquid, watching the bubbles rise. "He thinks he's the only one who knows how to count." The Gulfstream-sized engines of the commercial airliner roared as they climbed through the cloud layer. Once the seatbelt sign chimed off, the cabin became a mobile boardroom. Sterling had spread documents across his tray table and the empty seat across from him. Graphs, spreadsheets, and red-lined contracts covered every inch of surface area. He was in his element. The acquisition of Helios Logistics was his masterpiece. It was a classic pump and dump, disguised as a strategic merger. He would buy the logistics firm, strip its assets, the planes, the hangars, the trucking routes, sell them off to his own shell companies at a discount, and leave the shareholders holding a hollow shell. It was ruthless. It was illegal in 3 distinct ways, and it was going to make him another $500 million. "The fuel projections are the sticking point," Sterling muttered, tapping a pen against a spreadsheet. "Arthur, these numbers are trash. Helios claims their fleet runs at a 12% efficiency gain over the market average. That's mathematically impossible given the drag coefficient of their older 747 freighters." Arthur was trying to cut a piece of steak that Aara had just served. "Maybe they retrofitted the winglets? That could account for maybe 4%? That leaves 8% unaccounted for." Sterling slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. "If these numbers are fake, the valuation drops. If the valuation drops, my leverage ratio spikes, and the bank calls the loan before we even land." Aara appeared at his side to refill his water. She moved silently, placing the glass down near the corner of the spreadsheet. Sterling glared at her. "Careful. These papers are worth more than your entire lifetime of earnings." Aara paused. She looked down at the spreadsheet Sterling was pointing at. It was a complex analysis of fuel consumption versus cargo weight, factored against the varying costs of jet fuel in different global hubs. "Actually," Aara said softly. Sterling froze. He looked up, his eyebrows arching toward his hairline. "Excuse me. Did you just speak?" Aara kept her eyes on the paper. "I said, actually, sir. The problem isn't the drag coefficient. It's the currency arbitrage in the fuel purchasing. You're calculating the cost in USD, but Helios refuels primarily in Singapore and Frankfurt. The euro and the Singapore dollar have devalued against the dollar in the last quarter. The 12% efficiency isn't mechanical, it's fiscal." Silence descended on the first-class cabin. Arthur stopped chewing his steak. Sterling looked at Aara as if she had just grown a second head. He blinked once, then twice. Then a slow, cruel grin spread across his face. He leaned back in his leather seat, crossing his arms. "Well, well," Sterling drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. "Arthur, look at this. The stewardess has an opinion on international macroeconomics." "I was just observing the—" "Quiet," Sterling snapped. He picked up his glass of scotch and swirled it. "You think you're smart, don't you, Aara? You think because you read a headline in the Wall Street Journal left on a seat back, you understand high finance?" "I understand numbers, sir," Aara said, her voice steady, though her knuckles were white as she gripped the water pitcher. Sterling laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "You understand numbers? Okay, let's play a game. I'm bored, and the Wi-Fi is spotty, so you'll be my entertainment." He grabbed a blank napkin and a Mont Blanc pen. He scribbled a furious set of variables on it. "Since you're so keen on Helios's fuel efficiency," Sterling said, his voice rising so the other 6 passengers in first class could hear, "let's test your math. I want you to calculate the break-even point of a Boeing 747-8F carrying 130 tons of cargo from Hong Kong to Anchorage. Factor in a headwind of 80 knots, a burn rate of 10 kilos per kilometer, and a fuel cost of 2.85 per gallon. But here's the kicker. I want the result in net present value of the cargo if the delivery is delayed by 4 hours due to the headwind, assuming a standard cargo depreciation curve of 0.5% per hour." He slammed the pen down on top of the napkin. "You have 5 minutes," Sterling smirked. "If you get it right, I will write you a personal check for $50,000 right now. That's probably 2 years of your salary." Arthur giggled. "Sterling, come on, she's just a—" "But," Sterling interrupted, leaning forward, his eyes predatory, "if you get it wrong, or if you can't do it, you will stand at the front of this cabin and announce to everyone that you are just a waitress, and you will apologize for wasting my time. Do we have a deal?" The cabin was deadly silent. A tech CEO in seat 2A took off his headphones to watch. A wealthy heiress in 3A lowered her sunglasses. Aara looked at the napkin. She looked at the smirking face of Sterling Cross. A flash of memory hit her. A memory of a corner office in Chicago, a diploma on the wall, a life she had before the crash, before Ethelgard Capital bought her firm, stripped it, and fired everyone, leading to her husband's suicide. She looked at Sterling. He didn't recognize her. Why would he? To him, she was just a line item on a balance sheet he had deleted 10 years ago. "I don't need 5 minutes," Aara said quietly. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a cheap ballpoint pen. "Oh, this is going to be good," Sterling laughed, signaling Arthur to watch. "Go ahead. Amuse me." Aara leaned over the tray table. She didn't look at the napkin. She looked directly into Sterling's eyes. "The question is flawed," she said. Sterling's smile faltered slightly. "Excuse me?" "You asked for the break-even point, based on a fuel cost of 2.85 per gallon," Aara stated, her voice gaining strength, projecting clearly through the cabin. "But aviation fuel is sold by weight, not volume, because volume changes with temperature. At flight altitude, the density drops. If you calculate by gallon, your margin of error is 4%. On a flight from Hong Kong to Anchorage, that 4% error represents a loss of roughly $15,000. So your premise is wrong." Sterling sat up straighter. The smirk vanished. "However," Aara continued, uncapping her pen, "if we convert the fuel to pounds using the standard density of 6.7 pounds per gallon and apply the headwind vector you mentioned—" She began to write on the napkin. She didn't scribble. She wrote elegant, complex differential equations. She wrote faster than Arthur could think. "The 80-knot headwind increases burn by 14%, but you forgot the jet stream assist if they deviate north by 3 degrees, which any competent pilot would do. That saves 6%. She slashed a line through his variables. "The depreciation of cargo is irrelevant, because Helios contracts have a force majeure clause for weather delays under 6 hours. I know this because Helios uses the standard International Air Transport Association boilerplate contracts." She finished writing and spun the napkin around to face him. "The break-even isn't a dollar amount, Mr. Cross. It's a time. They break even at 7 hours and 42 minutes of flight time. Anything after that is a loss. But since the flight to Anchorage is 9 hours against that wind, the flight operates at a loss of $2,400, which means—" Aara leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a scream. which means buying Helios based on their current operating routes is a suicide mission. Unless, of course, you aren't buying them for the routes. Unless you're buying them to cook the books. Sterling Cross turned pale. The silence in the cabin was no longer awkward. It was electric. The silence in the first-class cabin stretched thin, like a rubber band ready to snap. The ambient hum of the aircraft engines seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of Sterling Cross's heavy breathing. He stared at the napkin Aara had slammed onto his tray table. The ink from her cheap ballpoint pen bled slightly into the soft paper, but the numbers were stark, accusatory, and terrifyingly accurate. Arthur Pendergast, the sweaty CFO, leaned over, adjusting his glasses. He squinted at the differential equation Aara had scrawled. "Sterling," Arthur whispered, his voice trembling. She's right about the fuel density. If we didn't account for the thermal expansion at altitude, our entire margin on the Helios deal is—" He tapped a frantic rhythm on his calculator watch. "It's gone. We'd be underwater by Q3. Sterling snatched the napkin off the table and crumpled it in his fist. He turned his glare onto Aara, expecting to see fear. He wanted to see the trembling lip of a servant who had overstepped her bounds. Instead, he found the cold, hard gaze of an executioner. "Who are you?" Sterling hissed, standing up. He was a tall man, used to using his height to intimidate, but Aara didn't take a step back. "You're no stewardess. A waitress doesn't know International Air Transport Association boilerplate contracts. Who sent you? Was it BlackRock? Is this a corporate espionage plant?" "I'm just the person refilling your water, Mr. Cross," Aara said, her voice maddeningly calm. She picked up the silver pitcher. "Would you like ice?" "I want your name," Sterling roared. The vein in his forehead bulged. "I want your employee ID number, and I want you off my plane." "It's not your plane, sir," Aara corrected him. "It belongs to British Airways. You just rented a seat. And my name is Aara. It's on the badge you didn't bother to read when you threw your coat at me. The man in seat 2A, the tech CEO with the noise-cancelling headphones, had removed them completely. He was watching the exchange with intense interest, a faint smile playing on his lips. Sterling jabbed a finger at Arthur. "Get the purser, now. I want this woman fired before we touch the ground. I want her blacklisted from every airline in the hemisphere." Arthur scrambled out of his seat, knocking over his own water glass in the process. He rushed toward the galley, shouting for the cabin director. Sterling turned back to Aara, stepping into her personal space. "You think you're clever? You think solving a math problem makes you smart? You're nothing. You're a rounding error. I can buy and sell your entire lineage before breakfast." "Money covers a lot of sins, Mr. Cross," Aara said, her eyes locking onto his. "But it doesn't cover bad mouth, and it certainly doesn't cover fraud." "Fraud?" Sterling laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "Careful, honey, that's slander. I have lawyers who will sue you until your grandchildren are born in debt." "Is it slander if it's true?" Aara asked. She glanced down at the open briefcase on the seat next to him. "You're buying Helios to hide the toxic debt from the Ethelgard liquidity crisis. You're using the logistics company's assets as collateral to secure a loan you have no intention of repaying. It's a classic bust-out scheme. You learned it from the mafia, but you dressed it up in a suit." Sterling's face went from red to a ghostly white. He slammed his briefcase shut, nearly catching his own fingers. You have been looking at my private documents." "I haven't touched your documents," Aara said. "I didn't have to. You've been bragging about it to Arthur for the last hour. You assumed I was too stupid to understand what debt-to-equity swap meant because I'm wearing an apron. You assumed I was furniture. The cabin director, a stern woman named Joyce, arrived with a panicked Arthur in tow. "Mr. Cross, I apologize. Is there a problem?" "This woman," Sterling pointed a trembling finger at Aara, "is harassing me. She is reading my confidential legal documents and making threats. I want her removed from this cabin immediately. If she comes near me again, I will have the FAA arrest her for interfering with a flight crew member, or whatever the charge is. Just get her out of my sight." Joyce looked at Aara, confusion etched on her face. Aara was their best attendant. Impeccable record, never a complaint. Aara untied her apron slowly. She folded it over her arm. "It's all right, Joyce. Mr. Cross is feeling sensitive about his portfolio today. I'll go assist in economy. I believe the air is cleaner back there anyway." She turned to leave, but stopped and looked back at Sterling one last time. "Check your email, Mr. Cross. I believe the 4 p.m. deadline you were worried about has passed. But the markets never really sleep, do they?" With that, she walked through the curtain, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Sterling collapsed into his seat, loosening his tie. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his spine. He grabbed his phone. "Arthur, get the Wi-Fi working. Check the Helios closing price. Now!" Arthur was fumbling with his laptop. "I'm trying, Sterling. The connection is slow over the Atlantic." Sterling poured himself another scotch, his hands shaking. He downed it in one gulp. "She's a spy," he muttered to himself. "She has to be. Someone from the SEC planted her. Or maybe it's the Russians." From seat 2A, the man spoke up for the first time. His voice was deep, gravelly, and carried an American accent. "She didn't look like a spy to me, Cross," the man said. "She looked like someone who knows exactly what a bust-out scheme is. And honestly, her math was better than yours." Sterling whipped his head around. "Mind your own business. Who are you anyway?" The man smiled, extending a hand that remained ignored. "Name's David. I work in compliance." Sterling sneered. "Compliance. Glorified accountants. Go back to your movie, David. The adults are working." Sterling didn't notice the look David exchanged with the heiress in 3A. It was a look of recognition, a look that said, "It's beginning." An hour later, the plane began to shudder. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're hitting a patch of rough air over the North Atlantic. Please fasten your seatbelts." The physical turbulence was nothing compared to the turbulence inside Sterling Cross's laptop. He had finally managed to connect to the onboard satellite internet. He refreshed the page for the London Stock Exchange. He expected to see the Helios Logistics merger announcement. He expected to see his stock price soaring. Instead, he saw red. "What is this?" Sterling whispered. Arthur leaned in, gasping. "Sterling, look at the news ticker." Across the bottom of the Bloomberg terminal screen, a headline was flashing. "Anonymous whistleblower leaks Ethelgard Capital insolvency documents." "Insolvency!" Sterling shrieked. "We aren't insolvent. We have creative liquidity." He clicked the link. A PDF document had been uploaded to a public server. It contained hundreds of pages of emails, ledgers, and recorded transcripts. Transcripts of conversations that Sterling had held in private boardrooms. Transcripts of conversations he had held in this very airport lounge 3 hours ago. "How?" Sterling grabbed his hair, pulling at it. "How is this possible? This just happened. Who is leaking this?" He scrolled furiously. The document wasn't just a data dump. It was an analyzed report. It broke down every shell company, every offshore account in the Caymans, every illegal hedge. And the commentary, the notes in the margins of the PDF explaining the fraud, were written in a specific, elegant handwriting style. It was the same handwriting that was on the napkin. "It's her," Sterling whispered. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The waitress. She didn't just do the math in her head. She wrote this report. He unbuckled his seatbelt, ignoring the illuminated sign. "Sit down, Sterling," Arthur cried out, as the plane dipped sharply, sending a glass sliding off the table. "Get out of my way." Sterling shoved Arthur aside and marched toward the galley curtain. He ripped it open. The economy cabin was dark, most passengers sleeping. Aara was sitting on a jump seat near the front, reading a paperback book by the light of a small reading lamp. She looked up as Sterling stumbled through the curtain, his face purple with rage. "You!" Sterling screamed, causing several passengers to wake up with a start. "You leaked it! You destroyed me!" Aara closed her book calmly. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. The turbulence shook the floor, but she balanced perfectly, as if she were rooted to the ground. "I didn't leak anything, Mr. Cross," Aara said. "I simply hit send on a draft that has been waiting in the cloud for 3 years. I was just waiting for you to confirm the final variable." "What variable?" Sterling spat. "What are you talking about?" "The Helios acquisition," Aara said, stepping closer to him. The darkness of the cabin made her eyes look like black pools. "I needed to know you were actually going to go through with it. I needed you to commit the crime before I could punish you for it. If you had walked away today, if you had shown 1 ounce of hesitation or ethics, I wouldn't have sent the file, but you didn't. You bragged about it. You mocked the math. You sealed your own fate. Who are you?" Sterling demanded again, his voice cracking. "You aren't Aara." "My name is Aara," she said. "But you wouldn't know my last name. You never bothered to learn the names of the people you crushed. 10 years ago, you hostile took over a mid-sized tech firm in Chicago called North Star Systems." Sterling blinked. The name sounded vaguely familiar. "So, I buy 10 companies a year. It's business." "It wasn't business." Aara's voice dropped, ice cold. "You bought North Star for its patent portfolio. You stripped the assets, liquidated the pension fund to pay your own bonuses, and fired 400 people overnight. One of those people was the CFO of North Star. A brilliant man. A kind man. He spent 20 years building that pension fund so his employees could retire with dignity. When you stole it, he fell into a depression so deep he couldn't see the light." Aara took a breath, her voice trembling slightly, not with fear, but with suppressed fury. "He was my husband. Michael Whitman. He took his own life 3 months after you liquidated the company. You bought a new yacht that year. You named it the Conqueror." Sterling stepped back. The plane lurched again, throwing him off balance. He grabbed a seat back to steady himself. I didn't know," Sterling stammered. It's the market. Casualties happen." "I was the head of risk analysis at North Star, Sterling," Aara said. "I wasn't just the wife. I was the one who built the algorithms you stole. I knew where you hid the money then, and I know where you hide it now. I spent the last decade waiting. I took this job because I knew you flew this route to London once a month. I knew eventually you'd get sloppy. I knew eventually your arrogance would outpace your intelligence." You're a stewardess," Sterling said, trying to find his footing, trying to find some way to feel superior. "You serve drinks. You're a nobody. I am the person who just emailed the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Serious Fraud Office in the UK, and the editorial board of the Financial Times," Aara said. "And I attached the audio recording of you admitting to the Helios fraud in the lounge. You really should be careful about speaking so loudly, Sterling. Phones record very well these days, even from inside a pocket." Sterling patted his chest. His phone was there. but he realized she meant her phone. You recorded me? One-party consent laws apply in New York, Aara said with a dry smile. I checked the statutes. I'm very thorough with my homework, unlike you. Sterling looked around. Passengers were staring. Some were holding up their phones, filming the meltdown of the billionaire in the aisle. Give me the phone, Sterling lunged at her. Sit down. A booming voice came from behind Sterling. It was the man from seat 2A. David. He was standing in the aisle, blocking Sterling's path. He was no longer the casual traveller. He stood with the posture of law enforcement. Don't touch her, Cross, David said. Get out of my way, Sterling snarled. This woman is crazy. She's hacking my company. She's not hacking anything, David said, pulling a badge from his jacket pocket. She's a cooperating witness. I'm Special Agent David Ross, FBI, Financial Crimes Division. We've been building a case against Ethelgard for 2 years. Aara here has been instrumental. Sterling froze. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. FBI? Sterling squeaked. On a plane? We knew you were trying to flee the jurisdiction to London to finalize the Helios deal before the indictment dropped, Agent Ross said. We needed to catch you in the act of wire fraud. Thanks to your little lecture on the napkin and the transfer order you just sent via the plane's Wi-Fi, we have you on wire fraud, securities fraud, and insider trading. The moment this plane lands at Heathrow, Scotland Yard is waiting to extradite you back to the US. Sterling looked at Aara. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She just looked tired, like a soldier who had finally put down a heavy pack. You tested my math, Sterling, Aara said softly. And you failed. This can't be real, Sterling muttered. I'm Sterling Cross. I'm a billionaire. Not anymore, Aara said. I just checked the stock price. Ethelgard is down 60% in pre-market trading. By the time we land, your margin calls will trigger. You're broke, Sterling. You're actually negative. Sterling's legs gave out. He collapsed onto the floor of the economy aisle. The turbulence rocked him gently, like a baby in a cradle. But there was no comfort to be found. He looked up at Aara, pleading. I can fix this. I can pay you. How much? 5 million? 10? Aara looked down at him with pity. You still don't get it. You think everything has a price. But some things just have a value. And my husband's life was more valuable than your entire portfolio. She turned to Agent Ross. Agent, would you like some coffee? It's going to be a long flight. I'd love some, Aara, Ross smiled. As Aara walked back to the galley to brew a fresh pot, Sterling Cross sat on the floor, surrounded by the nobodies in economy, realizing that for the first time in his life, he was the smallest person in the room. But the story wasn't over. The plane still had 3 hours to land, and Sterling Cross was a cornered rat, and rats, when cornered, tend to bite. The remaining 3 hours of Flight 88 were a study in claustrophobia. Sterling Cross had been escorted back to seat 1A, not as a king returning to his throne, but as a prisoner. Agent David Ross sat in 1B, occupying the seat Arthur Pendergast had vacated. Arthur, now sobbing quietly and drinking copious amounts of ginger ale, had voluntarily moved to the jump seat in the galley, desperate to distance himself from his former boss. The cabin lights were dimmed for the night portion of the flight, casting long, eerie shadows against the fuselage. Sterling sat staring at the flight map on the screen. The little plane icon was inching painfully slowly across Ireland. You can't do this, Sterling whispered, leaning toward David. His voice was a mix of aggression and pathetic wheedling. Do you have any idea who I have dinner with? The Attorney General was at my Hamptons house last July. We ate lobster rolls. If you arrest me, your career is over. I can make a phone call right now and have you reassigned to guarding a post office in rural Alaska." David didn't even look up from his Kindle. "I like Alaska. The fishing is good. And the AG, I wouldn't count on him, Sterling. When the ship sinks, the rats don't just leave. They eat each other. By the time we land, your friends will be issuing press releases stating they barely knew you." Sterling gritted his teeth. He needed an ally. His eyes darted around the cabin. They landed on seat 3A, the heiress. She was awake, sipping herbal tea, reading a hardcover book. She was elegant, in her 60s, wearing a cashmere shawl that probably cost more than Aara's entire wardrobe. Throughout the shouting match, she had remained perfectly composed, observing everything with a detached, aristocratic amusement. Sterling leaned across the aisle, straining against the invisible leash of the FBI agent. "Ma'am," Sterling hissed. "Ma'am, listen to me. This is a setup. It's a shakedown. I'm Sterling Cross. You know the name, right?" The woman lowered her book. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and completely unbothered. "I know the name, Mr. Cross. It's been rather difficult to avoid it for the last 2 hours." "Good," Sterling nodded feverishly. "Then you know I'm a man of resources. This waitress and this Fed, they're fabricating evidence. I need a witness. I need someone of status to vouch for my character when we land. If you tell the police that they coerced me, that they hacked my computer, I can make it worth your while. I can get you into the Aurora Fund. 30% returns, guaranteed. Exclusive access." The woman stared at him for a long moment. Then, a small, pitying smile touched her lips. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice sounding like expensive crystal. "You really don't pay attention to people, do you? You only see wallets." "What?" Sterling blinked. "I'm not interested in your fund," she said. "And I'm certainly not interested in your character references. My name is Margaret Rochambeau." Sterling froze. The name hit him like a bucket of ice water. Rochambeau. The Rochambeau family owned half the shipping lanes in the Atlantic. They were old money, the kind of money that whispered while Sterling's money screamed. You're on the board of Helios," Sterling gasped. "I am the board of Helios," Margaret corrected him gently. "Or rather, my family trust holds the controlling interest. We were flying to London to meet you. We were considering your acquisition offer." Sterling's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. You were on the plane this whole time?" "I like to see who I'm doing business with," Margaret said, taking a sip of her tea. "My father taught me that a man's character is best revealed when he thinks the powerful aren't watching. I wanted to see how you treated the staff. I wanted to see how you handled a simple delay." She gestured toward the galley, where Aara was quietly preparing the pre-landing meal. "You failed the test before we even left the tarmac, Mr. Cross. But the way you treated Aara, the way you mocked her intelligence, that was the confirmation I needed." "Margaret, please," Sterling begged, sweat dripping down his nose. "It was stress. I was under pressure. The deal is still good. The numbers work." "The numbers were a lie," Margaret said, her voice hardening. "Aara proved that in 3 minutes on a napkin. And thanks to the Wi-Fi, I've already emailed my legal team. The deal is dead, Mr. Cross. And since Helios was the collateral for your loans, I imagine your company is dead too." She put her headphones back on, signaling the end of the conversation. Sterling slumped back into his seat. He felt a tightness in his chest. It wasn't a heart attack. It was the crushing weight of total, absolute defeat. He was trapped in a metal tube at 30,000 feet, sandwiched between the law that was arresting him and the client who had just fired him. And the person serving him his final meal on this flight was the woman whose life he had ruined. Aara appeared with a tray. She placed it down gently. It was the standard first-class breakfast. Fruit, yogurt, a warm croissant. "Get it away from me," Sterling muttered. "You should eat, Sterling," Aara said, her voice devoid of malice. "They don't serve croissants where you're going. The detention center at Heathrow usually offers cold sandwiches." Sterling looked up at her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why didn't you just sue me? Why do this? Why the charade?" "Because a lawsuit is just paper," Aara said, leaning down so only he could hear. "And you know how to burn paper. I didn't want your money, Sterling. I wanted you to feel what Michael felt. I wanted you to feel the walls closing in. I wanted you to know what it's like to be smart, capable and powerful, and have it all stripped away by something you can't control." She straightened up, smoothing her uniform. "And besides," she added, "I wanted to prove that a waitress can do calculus." The fasten seatbelt sign chimed. The pilot's voice was somber. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." The descent into London. Heathrow was typically grey and rainy. Rain streaks whipped across the windows, blurring the world outside. For Sterling, it looked like the bars of a cell were already forming. As the plane taxied to the gate, the usual hustle of passengers standing up to grab luggage didn't happen in first class. Agent Ross stood up and addressed the cabin. "Everyone remain seated, please. We have a security situation to resolve first." Sterling looked out the window. The jet bridge was moving toward the plane, but down on the tarmac, flashing blue lights reflected off the wet pavement. 3 police cars, 2 black SUVs. Men in high-visibility jackets were waiting at the bottom of the stairs. The cabin door opened. The cold, damp English air rushed in, smelling of jet fuel and rain. 2 officers from Scotland Yard boarded, followed by a severe-looking woman in a suit. "Sterling Cross?" the woman asked. Sterling didn't stand. He couldn't. His legs felt like lead. Agent Ross hauled him up by the arm. "That's him," Ross said. "He's all yours." "Sterling Cross," the British officer said, reciting the caution. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and insider trading. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court." They clicked the handcuffs on him. The sound was loud in the quiet cabin. It was a mechanical finality. Click, click. As they marched him toward the door, Sterling tried to hold his head up. He tried to summon the dignity of the CEO who had rung the opening bell at the NYSE. But as he passed the galley, he saw Aara. She was standing by the door, saying goodbye to the passengers as per protocol. "Goodbye, Mr. Cross," she said. Her face was serene. "Thank you for flying with us." Sterling stopped. He looked at her. He wanted to scream. He wanted to curse her. But he saw the way the other passengers were looking at her, with awe, with respect. And he saw the way they looked at him, with disgust. "You're a witch," he spat. "I'm a mathematician," she replied. "And you just reached the end of the equation." He was shoved out onto the jet bridge. But the real hard karma wasn't the arrest. That was expected. The real blow came when he entered the terminal. Sterling expected a private exit. He expected to be whisked away in a back corridor. But because of the chaotic nature of the leak Aara had orchestrated, the press had been alerted. Dozens of photographers and reporters were pressed against the glass of the arrivals hall. And right there, on the massive television screens that lined the Heathrow terminal, screens usually reserved for ads about perfume and watches, was the news. Breaking news. Ethelgard Capital collapses. The screen showed live footage from New York. People were walking out of his headquarters carrying boxes. The FBI was raiding his office, and then the screen cut to a graph, the stock price of Ethelgard Capital. It was at 0.8 Trading had been suspended. The company was gone. His billions, tied up in stock options and leverage, were vaporized. Sterling watched the screen as the police dragged him through the concourse. He saw his legacy turn to ash in real time, and then a final twist of the knife. The screen switched to an interview. It was an old clip, dug up by the news networks from 10 years ago. It was an interview with Michael Whitman, Aara's late husband, just weeks before his company was destroyed by Sterling. In the clip, Michael was smiling, holding a young child, Aara's daughter. "We build things to last," Michael said in the video. "Finance isn't about the quick buck. It's about trust. If you lose the trust, the math doesn't matter." Sterling stared at the dead man, lecturing him from the grave. "Keep moving," the officer said, pushing him forward. As Sterling was shoved into the back of a police van, the rain soaking his expensive suit, he realized the ultimate irony. He had spent his life treating people like numbers. He thought he was the operator, but in the end, he was just the remainder. A zero. Back on the plane, the first-class cabin was empty, except for Aara. She was cleaning up the newspapers. She picked up the crumpled napkin Sterling had thrown. She smoothed it out. On one side, his arrogant, messy scrawl. On the other, her elegant, precise solution. She folded the napkin carefully and put it in her pocket. It wasn't a souvenir. It was a receipt. Payment received in full. 6 months later, the Southern District of New York Federal Court was packed. It wasn't the kind of crowd that gathered for a celebrity divorce. It was a crowd of angry creditors, former employees, and the sharks of Wall Street who had come to watch one of their own bleed. Sterling Cross sat at the defense table. He looked 20 years older. The bespoke suits were gone, replaced by an ill-fitting grey suit provided by his legal counsel. His hair, once dyed a rich chestnut, was now white and thinning. But the biggest change was his eyes. The predator's glint was gone, replaced by the dull, watery gaze of a man who hasn't slept in weeks. He had tried to fight it. He had tried to blame Arthur Pendergast. But Arthur, desperate to avoid a 20-year sentence, had sung like a canary. Arthur had handed over hard drives, voice memos, and a specific napkin that had been logged into evidence as Exhibit A. The prosecution called their final witness. "The people call Aara Whitman." A murmur went through the courtroom. For months, the press had dubbed her the mathematician of Flight 88. She walked to the stand wearing a simple navy blazer. She didn't look like a media sensation. She looked like a professional. Sterling couldn't look at her. He stared at his hands. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named D.A. Reynolds, walked the jury through the timeline. "Mrs. Whitman," Reynolds asked, "can you explain to the jury how you knew the defendant was committing fraud based on a simple conversation about fuel efficiency?" Aara leaned into the microphone. "Fraud isn't magic," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "It's just an equation that doesn't balance. Mr. Cross assumed that because I was serving him whiskey, I couldn't see the numbers. But the numbers were screaming. He was claiming efficiency gains that violated the laws of physics to inflate a valuation that violated the laws of economics. And why did you wait until that flight to act?" Aara looked directly at Sterling. "Because for 10 years, I watched him destroy companies like my late husband's. I watched him treat people like overhead costs to be cut. I waited until he was at his most arrogant, at his most secure, because I knew that's when he would make a mistake. Math requires patience." The jury didn't need much convincing. The deliberation took less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, securities fraud, racketeering. The judge, a stern man who had lost his own pension in the 2008 crash, looked down at Sterling over his spectacles during sentencing. "Mr. Cross," the judge said, "you treated the global economy as your personal casino, and you treated your employees and service staff as less than human. You believed you were the smartest person in the room. It is the opinion of this court that you have a lot to learn about humility." The gavel banged. 25 years. No parole for at least 20. Sterling was led away in handcuffs. As he passed the gallery, he looked for a friendly face. There were none. His board members had abandoned him. His wife had filed for divorce and taken the Hamptons house. He was alone. But the story didn't end in the courtroom. Real life rarely ties up so neatly. 2 weeks after the sentencing, Aara stood on the windy observation deck of the Empire State Building. It was a clear day. She could see the planes taking off from JFK in the distance, tiny silver specks rising into the blue. "It's a good view," a voice said behind her. Aara turned. It was Margaret Rochambeau, the heiress from seat 3A. Margaret was leaning on a cane, looking impeccable as always. "Mrs. Rochambeau," Aara smiled, "I didn't expect to see you here. Please call me Margaret," the older woman said. "I wanted to give you this personally." She handed Aara a thick envelope. "What is this?" "It's a job offer," Margaret said. "Not as a waitress. Helios Logistics survived the scandal, barely. We purged the board. We're rebuilding. We need a new CFO. Someone who understands that fuel density changes with altitude. Someone who understands that ethics are a long-term asset." Aara looked at the envelope. It was a ticket back to the life she had lost. The salary was likely 7 figures. It was redemption. It was power. Aara held the envelope for a long moment, watching the city breathe below her. Then she gently handed it back. Margaret looked surprised. "You're refusing. Aara, you're the most qualified person in the city. You took down Sterling Cross." "I took him down because I had to," Aara said softly. "But I don't want to be in that world anymore, Margaret. The boardrooms, the projections, the fighting for margins. It took my husband from me. It almost took me." "Then what will you do?" "I'm going back to school," Aara said, a genuine smile lighting up her face for the first time in years. "To teach. High school math. I want to teach the next generation that numbers aren't just for making money. They're for finding the truth. And I want to make sure that no kid grows up thinking they're just anything." Margaret stared at her, then smiled. "You really are one of a kind, Aara." "No," Aara shook her head, looking back at the skyline. "I'm just someone who did the math." Sterling Cross sits in a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania. He doesn't work in the library. He wasn't given a job in the kitchen. Because of his background in finance, the warden assigned him to the prison laundry. His job is to weigh the laundry carts to ensure the machines aren't overloaded. Every day, Sterling stands by a scale. He counts wet socks. He counts grey jumpsuits. He calculates the weight of dirty sheets. And every time he tries to cut a corner, every time he tries to overload a machine to save 5 minutes, the machine errors out. It beeps loud and harsh, echoing in the concrete room. And every time it beeps, the guard, a young woman working her way through college, looks over at him, shakes her head, and says the same thing. "Do the math again, Cross, and do it right this time." He is no longer a billionaire. He is no longer a CEO. He is just a man counting dirty laundry, reminding himself, day after day, that in the end, everything balances out. Sterling Cross spent his life thinking people were variables he could manipulate. He thought power gave him the right to ignore the humanity of those who served him. But he forgot the fundamental rule of mathematics. Whatever you do to one side of the equation, you must do to the other. He subtracted dignity from Aara, and in return, life subtracted everything from him. Aara didn't need his money, and she didn't need his job offer. She found her value in something money can't buy: the truth. And that is the story of how a billionaire's ego wrote a check his intelligence couldn't cash. It's a powerful reminder that you should never judge someone by their uniform. You never know who is secretly a genius, waiting for the right moment to strike. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were above you? Did you get your moment of karma? Let me know your story in the comments down below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a upload. Remember, be kind, be smart, and always check your math. I'll see you in the next video.